I'm Kelly Lemon.
And I'm Michael Paul Williams.
And welcome to the After the Monuments podcast, where we look at events and news about race in a historical context and see how, too often, history repeats itself. Hey, it's Kelly. We're picking up with part 2 of our conversation with Enjoli and Dr. Sesha Moon, talking about the Jackson Ward Project, covering more on their discovery phase and uncovering the lasting contributions of Abraham Skipwith in recontextualizing Jackson Ward in the shifting lens of what should be considered a monument in the present day and the future. And I want to kind of tie it back to the theme, our place in American history. And, Michael Paul, one of the things about this project is it allowed you to write a little deeper, but also, you had the very first, and correct me if I'm wrong, along with the Jackson Project, kind of cover rap on the front of the RTD, telling this history and telling this story. Talk about your writing with this.
Yeah, it's best thing about being a journalist is you're learning every day. And because, few of us come into this as geniuses. And I, like the Moon sisters, born and raised in Richmond, same neighborhood, the West End. And West End for life.
That's right.
But I did not know. I had assumed for a long time that Jackson Ward was named for Giles Jackson. I didn't know the history. It's probably what I wanted to believe, that it was named for a black man. So the first piece that we did as part of the Jackson Project was to unearth the history of the name, which I think was very useful and informative for our readers to crack the mystery. To a large extent, that it appears very much that it was named for Stonewall Jackson. The next piece dug into the kind of a Jackson Ward origin story, something that even predates the existence of the ward, regarding a gentleman named Abraham Skipwith, who the Moon sisters have dubbed the founding father of Jackson Ward, and the cottage that he built. The cradle of black entrepreneurship. Tell us something about Abraham Skipwith, if you all will.
Go ahead, Steve.
1793.
Enjoli and I, we had to scope our project. We also stand on shoulders of people who have been holding space for the histories in Jackson Ward well before the year in which we started this journey. And so I think that's important to say. I think what we've then learned from our project is that our focus is really before it became Jackson Ward, that 1871 and before. And when we wanted to, once we found out about, the naming of the ward, that led us to understanding more about not only the ward's name, but the streets. Once we understood the historical footprint of Jackson Ward, and then we had to look around, we were like, oh, so hold on, you mean all these streets are named after either enslavers or Confederate soldiers or pro-slavery sympathizers? It's almost like Enjoli was saying she couldn't even make a left or a right in the city anymore because every street, it's almost like ignorance is bliss. And so that's why, one of our efforts was unveiling the Vanguard, which were a mass installation of 15 honorary street signs to recontextualize the street names within Jackson Ward. But we wanted for it to be the full arc of the ward, dear friends like a Lorna Pinckney of a lot of us, as well as like a Lily Estes, more contemporary figures. But we also wanted to make sure we paid homage to the very first. And the only reason that we knew who Abraham Skipwith was because there were a couple of pieces written about him, and just that he was the first known Black homeowner and that he was one of the first, if not the first, Black Richmonders or Virginians with a fully executed will. And at the time, that's all we knew. But of course, that was enough. But to build out his biography, we had to put back on our research cap and do a little bit more digging on who he was to complement the other 14 bios of the Vanguard. And it really led us to understanding like a very remarkable history about him, but to also understand that like the roots in Jackson Ward as it relates to Black entrepreneurship and home ownership date back to 1793. Do you actually want to like get into his story or?
Just what does he embody? Why? What makes him the embodiment of the spirit of Jackson Ward?
That's a good.
I know that's right.
Well, I mean, I think one of the words that we've said consistently through this conversation is autonomy, right? And I think that one of the things that we see in him on his journey to freedom, on his journey to manumit himself, you can see that he himself in his mind is a freed man. He even, and Sesha can talk a little bit more about this, in his legislative petition says, do not reference me as a slave. Was the unfortunate characteristic of a slave. I am a man. I am a clerk. I do work, right? And so I think first and foremost, what we have is a Black person articulating his autonomy as a man, as a Black man in real time, right? In 1793.
Well, he says that in 1785.
1785, right? So we are talking about 100 years before Emancipation Proclamation, just about, right? So you have that. Then we talk about this idea of entrepreneurship and what it means to create your own economic stability and generational wealth. And he was very intentional about doing that. So even as a person who operated under the lens of enslavement, he was able to save up enough money to purchase his own plot of land in the area that will become Jackson Ward. He had the vision to not only purchase the land, but build his own home, create spaces for his family with additional plots of land. And then as Sesha will go into when it comes to his will, to actually to create a blueprint for what it meant to leverage these items for sustained generational wealth and growth and evolution for the family. And so when we think about Jackson Ward, when we think about what it means to be the Harlem of the South and the Black Wall Street, those are the characteristics that those are really the shoulders that these people are standing on in order to manifest that now that we are post-slavery.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, when I think about why he embodies it, is because he had the audacity, number one. You know, Jackson Ward is an audacious space. And so he had the audacity, he had the vision, he had the tenacity, and then he had the follow through.
One of the things that Sesha and I always, kind of talk about is, they've been bucking at people. They've been putting their chest out since 1793. There's no reason for us not to, right? Like, they was doing it back then. We can do it now.
Absolutely.
Can I say one thing, and it really ties in well to not only the essence of this podcast and the name of it, but I think it really will answer my question on, I really had to sit and think about what he embodies. I think the word autonomy really hits on what he embodied for his lifetime. But when I look at him, I think you'll see how destined this is for me and Enjoli, because we say Jackson Project is an ancestral assignment. When we first started to think about our social inquiries for this work, we presented 3 key questions. And the first one was, like the rest of this country, Richmond has a decision to make, because at this very moment, we can confront who we were while also choosing who we will be. And so we as a city must ask ourselves, are we willing to allow our legacy to be forever tethered to a lost cause, with our greatest contribution to the world being the former capital of a defeated Confederacy? Or will we use this moment to correct course for a more just cause? Question 2, are we brave enough to pivot away from the one-dimensional slave narratives that no longer serve us and take the opportunity at hand to elevate the best of our lineages and legacies, while realizing that the historic preservation of Black American experiences are worthy of more than mere markers? And number 3, are we bold enough to celebrate the Black excellence that managed to not only survive but thrive in the face of social and systemic oppression, becoming a North Star in the former capital of the South for future generations to come? And that's my question. That's my answer. He is a North Star. When we look at his legislative petition, when we look at his last will and testament, we look at his manumission papers, and particularly his will that he ends almost every paragraph with, I leave this to my heirs forever. Forever. He was a blueprint. And to spend time with these documents, that someone was not only competent and educated enough to know these concepts as an enslaved person, but knew enough to put it down in paper with specific instructions from everything from the parcels to the property to possessions and what to do with them, so that you can have that same autonomy. When I look at him, I see a North Star that's guiding us all. And so I think that's going to be my answer.
That was a good one.
We wrote that before we even knew who Skipwith was, and he was the answer to all of those questions.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah. I just want to say, for those that are listening, one of the things that I appreciate about what y'all are doing, and Michael Paul and I kind of talked about this on the pilot, is that you all are explaining history in a way that's dope, in a way that, you know, is going to resonate to a younger voice, that's going to ask. It's going to make them ask more questions. It's something that I can understand and kind of ponder on, and it makes me think. So I appreciate the way that you all are presenting this, you know, kind of even down to how we are making these ancestors, like we're making sure they're figures. I mean, prime example, all those that are listening to this on audio, you can't see my shirt, but, you know, like, we know who Maggie Walker is. We know what she looks like. We know what John Mitchell looks like. We know what these people look like. We know what these places look like, because you all have creatively told this story in a dope way. So I just wanted to make sure I said that.
Can I say one thing about that when we talk about access? Again, you might not be able to see us. But if I had to describe myself right now, I have on a baseball cap and the biggest hoop earrings that you can buy from the beauty supply store, okay? And the same for Enjoli. I think when we went into these spaces, people like Mike and Mike, people like Greg, they welcomed us into these spaces and did not judge us. Because when I walk in the room, you might not know I have a PhD because I don't really dress, quote unquote, like I have a PhD. And so making sure that you create diverse and inclusive and accessible and equitable spaces so that people can be able to find their own truths, that's equally as important in this work as well.
And I'll just say, too, that as people come across information, when you start finding your own Jackson, I appreciate what you're saying, Kelly, because a lot of times information like this ends up kind of circulating in a silo, academic circles, circles of historians. It doesn't necessarily get put out to like the world at large, and sometimes not in a way that might be the most engaging. You know, it can become super academic. And so what does it mean to create spaces that are engaging and inviting and accessible and not like designed to be over your head? You know, so I am the director of programming at Jackson, and I look forward to creating spaces where people can come together and gather and learn, but learn in ways that are fun and that will resonate in the heart space. A lot of times we're having these conversations as a headspace conversation, and that matters, right? But it's the heart space connection that allows it to like walk away with you and mean something and hopefully motivate and impact you in a way that you go out and do your own thing in the world.
Real quick, After the Monuments is proud to thank Team Henry Enterprises for their support of our show. Team Henry Enterprises is a Black-owned contracting firm specializing in office, retail, medical, multifamily, and higher education construction of all scopes and sizes. In the wake of the George Floyd protest, Team Henry is the very firm contracted by the city of Richmond to take down the Confederate monuments in Richmond and by many other municipalities to remove other Confederate monuments around Virginia and throughout the Southeast. Learn more about Team Henry and how they can help your community rebuild, renovate, or design at teamhenryent.com.
So, Abraham Skipwith is a metaphor for the American story, as is Jackson Ward. So we have a man ahead of his time, who freed himself, acquired property, built a cottage, built a home for his family, executed a will, and set his family on the path for wealth creation over the decades, and also part of a very American story. Something went awry there. The cottage fell into harm's way because of the aforementioned interstate highway. Tell us about the cottage, what we know now, and what your vision is for the role that the cottage might play in the reparative work that you're doing in Jackson Ward.
All right, you want me to take the first part, Lee, and then you take out what we want to do?
Sure.
All right. I think if I had to maybe change some language, only because of what Jackson has shown us, is maybe he wasn't ahead of his time. Maybe it's just the fact that we never knew that there were Abraham Skipwiths all throughout this country. and it's a hidden story. I think that's one of the things that we've learned through this work. And that's why he needs to be a part of the national narrative, because when I look at I can't even get to the cottage first because I have to think about the entirety of his will. And, we know now that the papers show that he had things like silver and gold and livestock and furniture and clothing. But for me, it's the horse and buggy. We cannot get to the cottage before we talk about the horse and buggy. This is a Black man riding around Richmond, Virginia in 1797 in his own horse and buggy, not in service to another. And so that gets back to like the audacity that Enjoli was talking about. And so for us, I think that the cottage is a manifestation of that audacity. And it is an actual remnant remaining. Growing up here, you don't hear that type of multidimensional narrative about what it meant to be Black, and not just from Richmond, but Black and American at that time. Because remember, he's around during the American Revolution. That's important. He's around this country's origin story. So isn't that crazy that Jackson Ward's origin story would get us to this one? But I also think that what's super important, like when we just think about Abraham Peyton Skipwith and what that cottage represents, is that so much of our histories from that time are anecdotal. And this is a rarity where we have paperwork that are his own words. We have an actual, it's been kind of, altered over time, but we have a understanding or an idea of the type of home he lived in by way of the cottage that's currently been dislocated to a nearby county, but then also through the photographs that were taken of the home. And so what we have up here above anything is a rare opportunity to piece together a life and a lineage and a legacy of a man through his own words, through his own hard work. And so unfortunately, what happened to the cottage is, it stayed in the house, stayed in the family's custody for over 100 years. That's the beautiful part. When he said, I want to leave this to my heirs forever, they tried. When you look at the photographs, they built like a mini estate where multiple descendants lived on the parcels that he bought in the northern neck of the city in 1793. It was a mini, it's Black America's Monticello. That's what he built. And so they held on to it to the early 1900s. It then changed hands to a Black family by the name of the Colemans, and they stayed in the home until the 1950s. And then they were forcibly condemned from the property, and they fought to try to stay. See, that's why access to also Black newspapers are important, because you need to understand that Black people resisted. They fought this thing. They fought even the referendums that even made the highway a local issue that then pivoted it to a state issue. And now we think of it through the lens as a federal system. And unfortunately, they lost out. But what we had here is after being condemned from pennies from your properties, then what you have is, historic preservationists, quote unquote, coming in and taking several homes and moving them to nearby counties and using them for private use, and not as main homes, but more so like weekend homes,
recreational use.
Recreational. And so you're taking Black history from its original locations, and they are now, sitting not just in a nearby county, but on the former plantation of the Secretary of War for the Confederate Army. That's where Skipwith's home, or at least the remnants of it currently sit. But I think Enjoli can explain that once we, met with the family, did an analysis of the home, recognized that a lot of the fabric from the home that was original to Skipwith was actually removed from the home. And so that's another conversation. Are we historic preservationists if we don't preserve histories within Black spaces? But that led us, or Skipwith led us to what we want to do, to re-erect a cottage in his memory. And I'll let Enjoli kind of touch on that.
Enjoli and Sesha, you said you talked to the family. That's just not something that is said. You just called Skipwith's family and was like, hey, y'all, we want this information. How is that perceived as well? Who are y'all to be calling us to do this?
Well, just for clarity, it wasn't the Skipwith family that we were able to get in touch with.
Okay.
We were able to get in touch with the family of the people who moved the home. So those quote unquote preservationists that took this home from Jackson Ward, understood its architectural values, moved it to this space, this former plantation, and it's been there since the 1950s. And so we were able to get in touch with that family to say, hey, and this is thanks to Michael Paul Williams, so let's make sure we tip our cap there. When we were doing this research, we're under the impression that the home was demolished, like a lot of those homes in Jackson Ward. There was even documentation to speak to that. However, in conversation with Michael Paul Williams, he goes and does his own research, as journalists do, and says, hey, found this article. This might actually be that cottage. From there, reached out to the family, and indeed it was the cottage. We were invited out, or we asked could we come. They allowed us to come out. And when we got there, we knew instantly, like Sesha and I knew this is not staying here. It was a slave bell up, and it was the energy was like, wait a minute, this isn't right. So what does it mean to bring it back? But then, and
hold on. I don't want to interrupt, but context is important. Before we went out there, we thought we were going to go visit a farm. When we arrive and see an enslaved bell to the left, we recognize, oh no, this is a plantation. And so I think it's also just very important to set context, because I think when we talk about hidden histories, it's almost hard to find where certain things are if we aren't clear on the language being used in modern day times.
Great. And it's important. When we got out there, we were under the impression that this was a former plantation, but the language used by the family was farm. And so, it was an educational opportunity between us and the family to say, their thing was, well, what's the difference? The people who work it and how they work it. That's the difference. But in that, realizing, hey, this is, you should mention, this is a remnant that we rarely get, not just here in Richmond, but just in Black America in general. To be able to put your hands on something from 1793, especially something like a home, is so deeply rare. And so we instantly knew that we needed to see what it meant to bring it back. But then over time, in doing historical analysis of the home, we came to realize that most of the remnants of the home that were connected to Skipwith were extracted out of the home. So, because we mentioned it was a recreational home. So they actually remodeled it a couple of times and, made it something that was a little bit more comfortable for them, I guess you could say. And so in that, we realized that maybe we had a different opportunity here to actually reconstruct the home from scratch. Since we had his will, we have photographs of the space, and allowed us to really be able to recreate this space pretty accurately. Plus, what it allowed us to do was be able to bring in Black and minority-owned businesses into the process. In the attempt to move the home from one space to another, of course, when we think about the space of preservation and what it would have meant to keep it intact, what you clearly and quickly realize is that this is not a space that is occupied by people who look like us, right? And so what does it mean to now reconstruct it, be able to bring in people from different communities, our own communities? When we talk about Black generational wealth, how can Jackson Project pour into that concept, that reality? And so the reconstruction allows us to do that. And so we look forward to what it means to be able to put together the Skipwith cottage, to create this gambrel roof home in Jackson Ward. Of course, we would love to be able to put it back on his former property, but as we discussed, that was destroyed by the highway. And so we are looking forward to bringing it back to a plot of land in Jackson Ward and having that open by 2026. We spoke a little bit about how this connects to the American narrative. 2026 is the 250th anniversary of the creation of the United States of America, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And so what Skipwith does is add some additional context and texture to what it meant to be alive during that period, to be Black during that period, to not be on a plantation, and to kind of disrupt the entire narrative of what Blackness meant. And so we are looking forward to what it means to open those doors in 2026 and add those additional layers to the conversation. And, and I'll let Sesha talk about those direct points of connectivity that Skipwith kind of has to that narrative as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he's our founding father, but he had direct ties to the traditionally recognized forefathers. A lot of connect, 1 or 2 degrees of separation to Thomas Jefferson, and then an actual signer of the Declaration of Independence actually signed for his freedom papers. And so, we already know what America, America 250 could potentially look like, celebrating Boston, Philadelphia, as though Black people weren't here, Indigenous people weren't here in 1776, and we were. And not only were we here, but we were surviving. And Skipwith is actual evidence that we were also thriving. And so I think that's one. I think 2, when we think about being ancestrally led and Skipwith being a North Star, I wholeheartedly believe that he cannot rest in peace until we do this work. Because one thing that we found because of his will is the fact that his body was actually buried at his home. And so when we think about Interstate 95, it did not just take on Black-owned businesses. It took Black bodies as well.
Sacred spaces.
And so that's that. But then 3, one quick thing. One, we're working to fully tie together his full genealogical life and lineage. And so far, we've hit a lot of dead ends when it comes to the Skipwith Ropers because a lot of them died off. And we understand, one thing about our partnership with Richmond Times-Dispatch is the platform, the visibility that this gives to us. And so in this moment, if there are Skipwith and Ropers who know this man, where the name were Abraham Peyton or Chloe or Mariah or Maria, or Alpheus or Peter Roper or Marietta, and if any of these names ring a bell for you, please reach out to the Jackson Project, info@thejacksonproject.org, that's JXN, because we're trying to find you guys as we try to pay homage to your ancestor.
It actually gives me chills because, this work is, again, we are allowing the American story, American history we're telling it through our own lens right now, through your work, through Michael Paul's work, just how we're, just doing this in Richmond in general. Sesha and Enjoli, a lot of eyes, bringing it back to a national, but more of a global tie too. A lot of eyes, have their focus on Richmond. Sesha, you talked about, the celebration that's happening in 2026. But before that, people want to come to Richmond, just to kind of see. Talk about the people that have visited Richmond lately so that they can, figure out how transportation, how tourism, how the outdoors, how all of these things play in the history of Black Americans from Richmond.
Well, and I'll just say, for me, we talk about the history, but it's important to acknowledge that we're making history every day. In 150 years, people will be talking about the decisions that are made right now. And so those people who are coming to Richmond to see, what this space looks like, can it be a model for this or for that? It's because people see the potential for us as a history-making space in this moment. Yes, because of the histories that we're excavating, but because of the potential that we have right now, and are we willing to take full advantage of it? As Sesha mentioned in those social inquiry questions, can we untether ourselves from the decision-making processes and the lens that we have seen ourselves through for so long? Are we brave enough to pivot away? And so, I want to make sure that we say that, because I think a lot of times we talk about history and we think about back then. Yeah. But history is also right now. Mm-hmm. And so, creating spaces for these conversations is extremely important. But yeah, a lot of eyes are on Richmond, as they should be. As Sesha said earlier, we want some respect put on our name. Yeah. So how do we take proper advantage of the moment that we have right now, though? Because as a person from Richmond, I've seen us have like little moments and they slip through our fingers. Right. But I think we have a real one now. We have more infrastructure in the city than we've ever had before. I think we actually have a culture that we've developed over the last maybe 15 years or so that we didn't have before, that I recall, And so I think we are at a special moment. But it's also, windows do close. Mm-hmm. So we have to make sure that we're taking proper advantage of the energy and the resources and the attention that we have right now. And we don't lull ourselves back into the old way thinking that we did something because we took down a monument. Right. You know what I mean? Yeah. You have to understand that, yes, those are policies and those things are real, but they're also symbolic to a certain degree. And so how do we use those to actually propel us forward in real, like, tangible ways.
Enjoli is in my head. This came to me earlier this week. I haven't even shared this with my sister yet. So, like, when we look at the historic preservation standards, right? When they decide which sites are worth saving, it's this, inherently racist, let's just keep it real, list of criterion used to decide if a home has the material integrity worth designating as a historic site. And the truth is, a lot of Black spaces are either destroyed, displaced, dilapidated. We don't have the resources to be able to keep up with the criterion to say that these spaces are significant enough to be deemed a historic site. And I say all that to say, because Skipwith is an example of that. Remnants of him were torn from this current house. And so now we have to reconstruct for interpretive purposes. And I was thinking this the other day, Lee. I was like, this will be, viewed as new fabric from 2022, but 250 years from now, that is now going to be deemed as a historic site by way of the, material integrity and fabric of the home. And so we have to be very clear that the truth is that some of these sites that are Black, they have to be reinterpreted and we have to start over. Mm-hmm. And that has to be okay within the field, because I think what we're finding, which me and Enjoli say often, we are more than mere markers. And this is an opportunity to put that, to manifest that. And that also brings to answer your question, we are also more than monuments. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. So when you come to Richmond, like a Pete Buttigieg who came here, we made sure, hats off to his entire team. A lot of them have roots in Richmond. Come on, 1 in 4 Black Americans being able to retrace your roots here. Mm-hmm. And they made sure to reach out to grassroots organizations and say, hey, where should we go in the city to understand the impact of infrastructure on disconnecting communities? And we centered another monument. Jackson Ward is a monument. Yes. Skipwith Cottage is a monument. We have to, shift the lens on what we deem as monuments. And the truth is, for me and Enjoli, our eye is on the prize with establishing a new one by way of the Skipwith Roper Cottage. And so shifting our lens a little bit and where we focus our attention, I think is critical with after the monuments coming down now.
And I'll just say, we were on a call recently and someone used the term that I thought was really relevant for here. Yes, those monuments are gone, but Richmond is a historical campus, right? This is a space that has history spread all up and through it. And so what does it mean for people to continue to do those diggings, people to find their Jacksons in their respective neighborhoods and elevate these stories to enrich the fabric of that campus? And so I think if we continue to look at ourselves through that lens, like not a particular place, not one neighborhood, not one street, not one particular monument, but this city itself is a historical campus. And how do we navigate it as such? Then I think when we talk about people coming to Richmond and taking advantage of this moment, I think that's one of the things that we can do to help inform how we take full advantage of Richmond in the right here, right now, and make a new history for ourselves.
Any closing words, Michael Paul?
Oh, I just, part of our thing here is you can't understand America unless you understand Richmond. And I think what we've heard today with Jackson Ward and Abraham Skipwith and his cottage is a very American story about achievement against the odds, displacement. And now we are at a space where a story that has been written out of our history is being written back in as we speak, thanks to the work of the Jackson Project. And I want to thank you all for doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Same to you. Thank you for both of y'all's work. When we think about ancestrally guided, it's not lost on me that you won the Pulitzer after 1619. We arrived on those waters in Williamsburg, and that work was awarded, and now your work, because Richmond was their next stop. Mm-hmm. And so I see the ancestors in the recognition in the work that you guys are doing, Michael Paul and Richmond Times-Dispatch. And so thank you for being partners in this work and sharing this platform. We appreciate y'all.
Thanks for opening the door.
One of the things that Enjoli, you just said is that we're making history. And this podcast, Part of the Valentine's responsibility is to capture all things Richmond, and to make sure that these stories are spread long past when, we're gone. And I think that that's what this podcast is going to do, is that we are digitally capturing the history that's being made currently as we compare it to the past. So, right back at you, Moon Sisters. Y'all keep doing the work. We appreciate you guys taking the time out of your schedules to come up on our very first podcast. And we are excited to share with the rest of the world what is happening right here in Jackson Ward.
Come home. It's called Roper Homecoming for a reason. 1 in 4. You guys, this is your home. Come. 1
in 4 Black Americans can trace their roots to Richmond. And I love saying it because I truly believe we started Black culture right here in Virginia. So thank you, Moon Sisters. We appreciate you. After the Monuments, Real Talk About Race with Michael Paul Williams and Kelly Lemon. It's a wrap. We'll talk to y'all next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of After the Monuments. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your podcast. After the Monuments is a Virginia Video Network production and produced by Matt Pachilli, Michael Paul Williams, and me, Kelly Lemon. Technical direction and editing from Bill Barksdale. Executive production from Paul Farrell, Diane Salvatore, and Paige Mudd. Will Royer provides studio support. Our artwork is by Krishna Mathis. I'm Kelly Lemon, and we'll see you next week on After the Monuments.